Acceptance. Diversity is acceptance.
Diversity is life.
Diversity is understanding.
Diversity is priceless.
Acceptance.
All people working together.
Infinite.
Unity. Most definitely unity.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Uncomfortable Conversations that Ignite Change. This year, the dialogue continues. My name is Joanna Deshay, and I have the great pleasure of serving as Executive Director of this amazing organization, Diversity Leadership Alliance. Can you believe it? We are halfway through the year, and we are so proud of the diverse and very important DEI and social justice topics we have been able to bring you through this Uncomfortable Conversations series. And we've got another really great one for you today. The dialogue series that we created was designed as this: a community space, a place where all of its members could listen and learn, and each of the webinars are really meant to be safe spaces, safe places for you, for me, for us to have difficult but meaningful, open and honest conversations. And that conversations, those conversations can become turning points and actionable items that really ignite change. Our desire is for people to walk away feeling transformed and feeling like they have some additional tools that they can use to begin to ask important questions that really get to the root of the insidious nature of racism and inequity across various systems. By having these meaningful dialogues with our corporate, community, and nonprofit members, we hope to eliminate some of the racist thoughts, racist behaviors, and actions, and encourage everyone to be advocates for social justice for all. So with that in mind, let us begin. I am so excited about today's webinar because, as most of you know, this one is near and dear to my heart because I do have a son that is on the autism spectrum, and as he likes to say, is differently abled. Today's webinar, entitled Wired Differently, is on how we can all become advocates and truly embrace neurodiversity in the workplace. And what I'd like to do now, before we get into kind of the meat and the content of today's webinar, is I would like to just remind you about our community rules of engagement. And I'd like to bring in Dla Education Committee member, Victoria Stinson, who is the Senior Training Specialist with Edward Jones. And she will remind you of some of the community rules of engagement. Victoria?
Thank you, Joanna. The Diversity Leadership Alliance is a community education organization, and as such, wants to ensure that our programs and events are inviting, respectful, and accessible to all. Before we begin today's program, we would like to remind everyone about our community rules of engagement. Also, a reminder to everyone that our duty here at DLA is to keep this space positive and productive, and listen actively and be open to the full spectrum of perspectives. Commit to foster greater empathy, try to relinquish the need to be right, ask questions and seek clarification for understanding. Definitely be respectful to the presenter and other attendees. No one or two individuals should dominate a discussion. Approach each other with kindness and love. As a community space, we reserve the right to remove anyone from the discussion who's become disruptive. Today, we have ASL translation being provided by Equal Access Services with our interpreters, Liz Robertson and Mike Rose, signing for us today. A very special thank you to Dave Wallenhop and his amazing team at Equal Access Services for their continued partnership and support. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I would now like to introduce you to our 20th anniversary conference co-chairs, Tiki Carmichael and Reed Despigliere, who will be providing additional information on this year's conference. Reed and Tiki.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Reed, and I have the pleasure of chairing this year's DLA conference. Many of you are going to leave this conversation wondering, how can I take action? What can I do? How can I give back? And our conference is an excellent opportunity to be involved with planning, be involved with individuals that are in this work every day, and invest some volunteer time in giving back to DLA. The conference is going to be in late November. We are planning a 3-day combination of an awards gala and 2 days worth of hybrid programming. And conference is really a time to set aside and root yourself in this issue for 2 days of deep dives. The conversation must continue. So if you would like to participate in the planning and become a volunteer, I'll post my email in the chat. Tiki Carmichael couldn't be with us, but she is on the planning committee as well as co-chair, and we would love to have your support. You can email me directly with any questions, and you can join us on Thursdays via Zoom for planning meetings. You're also welcome to start registering for the DLA conference as soon as that is available on our website, and award nominations are open, and you'll probably hear more about that later. Enjoy today's webinar. Really take a deep dive and take some space to think about these issues and think about these topics. And thank you for your time. I'll post my email in the chat. Back to you, Joanna.
I'm going to jump right in there for a second, Reed. Thank you very much. We're going to let everyone know all about our awards up front today. So good morning, everyone. I'm Brent Scholar. I'm the co-chair for the awards this year with Lorena Castro, from our partner with awards, which is SHRM. And I want to just share our screen really fast with you, just so you can see our wonderful page that we have already up. Our awards are ready to go for nominations. So please consider nominating those really great organizations that we have in the Valley, as well as individuals. We have lots of different awards, and as this being our 20th anniversary, we want a lot of nominations, which is why our awards have opened early. So please take advantage of that. Nominate those really great people in an inclusive workplace. We have small, medium, and large. We have inclusive nonprofit, as well as diversity leaders and a diversity youth leader. So please join us in nominating those today. And I will pass it back to Joanna.
I knew I was going to do the unmute thing at least one time, just once. So that's my one for the day. Thank you so much, Brent. Thank you so much, Reed. And thank you so much, Victoria. As you can see, right, this is a group effort because it takes all of us to make this amazing organization run and work. And I'm so grateful for all of your time and your contribution. So today is dialogue number 7 in the series this year. Can you believe it? We've had some amazing conversations. And today's dialogue, Wired Differently, is a powerful look into how we can all reimagine an inclusive and healthy workplace that truly embraces all neurological differences. Whether you're an HR professional, manager, or coworker, attendees today will learn to make meaningful connections between people and their skills, really placing the focus not on what they can't do, but rather on what unique attributes they bring to the table, they bring to your team. Today, attendees will receive some additional knowledge, resources, and tools needed to become champions and advocates for neurodiverse employees within their organizations in order to innovate and thrive as a team. This is how you become a more authentic, and socially inclusive company. I'm so pleased to have moderating our panel conversation today a new DLA education team member, Ms. May Dobbins, who is the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Director at Vitalant. So I'm going to bring her in right now to welcome you and introduce today's panelists. May?
Thank you, Joanna, and good morning, everyone. I am excited to be here today to moderate this conversation. I hope you got your coffee. I know that many of us on the panel on here have our coffee right here and are ready for what is going to be a great conversation and discussion with our experts. So the world as we know it has changed, and now more than ever includes many individuals that are unique and wired differently. Neurodiverse individuals in the workplace think, learn, and process information differently and are a vital and valuable contribution to any team's overall success. They contribute to building a more competitive workforce and need to be honored and recruited and welcomed and supported. Today, we have three experts with us who will share their stories and provide resources and also share important information on how you can be an effective ally for change in your work environment. I would now like to introduce you to our three dynamic panelists who will be guiding us through today's neurodiversity in the workplace conversation. First up, we have Dr. Joanne Pena. Dr. Jo, as she's affectionately known, is one of the most acclaimed experts in the cross-cultural communication and executive presence. As an HR employee relations business partner for MCCCD, she has worked for years advocating for accommodations for employees and students on the spectrum. As a certified Myers-Briggs facilitator, an executive communication coach, and cultural facilitator, Dr. Jo has coached numerous leaders to speak more powerfully in public and increase their executive presence, influence, and persuasion across cultures. Next, we have Ms. Laura Kameny. Laura taught workplace skills and professional communication for 3.5 years in the Maricopa community colleges. She received her Asperger's diagnosis shortly after, and for the last 10 years, she's provided coaching and HR support for those on the autism spectrum. Laura describes herself as bilingual, fluent in both the neurotypical and spectrum-based experience, and is able to help translate between the two groups when there is a cultural clash. Currently developing employment training for Autism Alliance of Michigan, Laura is also preparing to begin studies as a life coach or counselor to support the neurodiverse community. Last, but certainly not least, is Dr. Adhd C.E. Allison. Dr. Allison is Assistant Director of Student Accessibility and Inclusive Learning Services at Arizona State University. Spanning over 40 years working with people with disabilities, her background is a tapestry of music, disability, and social sciences. Her focus is on systems change related to disability, equity, inclusion, organizational growth, and personal transformation. Dr. Allison supports neurodiverse and neurotypical individuals as they seek to accomplish their personal and professional goals. Distinguished guests, a warm and gracious virtual DLA welcome to our panelists, Dr. Joanne Pena, Laura Kameny, and Dr. Adhd Allison. Okay, before we jump into our questions and discussion with these fabulous panelists, I'd like for us to do a quick poll and see where we all are at when it comes to our understanding of neurodiversity. So you should see a poll pop up right now on your screen. And the question is, who do you think is included when we talk about neurodiversity? So we're going to give you about 60 seconds to answer, to give your answers and your thoughts on this. Right there on your screen.
And May, I'm seeing the results coming in. We have almost about 100 participants today. We've got about 50% participation so far.
Awesome.
Oh, and I'm going to say we might have to go off script a little bit because or at least I'm going to actually ask our panel a pre-question. When you see these results and you're talking during your first piece, please talk about these results and what this means to you and where you see this, because I think it's really, it's very telling in a good way, folks, what I'm seeing. So I'm going to now end the poll and share the results. Here you go. May, what do you see?
Wow, okay. Someone with autism looks like got the most response. Someone who works with ADHD was the next. Okay. All right, I see where you're all at. And so the answer to this is all of these things represent when we talk about neurodiversity, all of these are included. So thank you all for participating in that poll. We appreciate you taking part of that. So our first set of questions is going to really be around recruitment. Currently, research shows that neurodiverse population remains a largely untapped talent pool, and that unemployment among this group runs as high as 80%, even though many people with neurological conditions are highly capable and have extraordinary skills. Dr. Allison, I'd like to start with the question, what is neurodiversity? Can you give us some insight on that?
Sure. Neurodiversity really deals with the different ways that people process information. And processing includes information in, information storage, and information retrieval for what comes out. People do that in different ways, and most of our institutions only recognize read a book and answer a test. So there's a whole realm of ways that people process that are not recognized and that could be very significant in working in a workplace today.
Thank you. And Dr. Joe, what about you? How would you define? Oops, you're muted, Dr. Joe.
I'd like to say that we're all differently able, and that some of us are good in math and science, for example, and some of us in the audience are good in English and maybe social sciences. So if you think about it that way, it does refer to the way that our brains are wired, and they are wired differently for each of us. It's just the continuum that might change as we go into different work situations or different educational situations. And both Dr. Adhd and I have been available to, she for students, me for employees now, but when I first went into higher education, I supported students who were wired differently. So a lot of my experience has been with students.
Thank you, Dr. Joe. And Laura, what about you? How would you define neurodiversity?
I think the key element of it is that it's someone who experiences the world in a profoundly different way. As Adhd was saying, from the way they receive information and process information, store it or retrieve it. I think it's a hidden disability often. I wasn't diagnosed until I was 37, which means I had a lot of job experiences where things weren't quite connecting the way I expected. And yet, when I tried to express that, instead of getting the support to make things better, I was taken as a bad faith actor. One of my first jobs out of college, just some temping work that I did. I remember one afternoon being asked to make a list of everything that's in the closet. Now, I'm imagining that most people in the audience are saying, oh yes, this is just office supply management. But this was my first job out of college. This was temping. And I had no experience of that. I'd been in an office with 3 people, and when we needed supplies, we went to the drugstore with petty cash. So this was just a different framework that I hadn't anticipated. Now, when I said, why do you want me to do that? Asking for clarification is a good skill. It's a good communication tool. But the response I got was not a helpful response. Why do you want me to do that? It's very important that we know exactly, precisely, specifically how much of all of these things we have. This is absolutely essential. And the more I asked for clarification, the more her voice raised up and the angrier she seemed to become. I didn't have any way out of it, but I knew that I was going to do my best to do this job. I was going to do everything I could to give her exactly what she asked for. So yes, instead of counting boxes of paper clips that afternoon, I counted the paper clips in the boxes. And not once, but twice, because it was very essentially important to have an accurate, specific, precise, accurate count. And if I had 99 in one count and 100 in the next, it had to be reconciled. The more I tried to comply with what she was asking of me, the more I appeared to her to be hostile. And when I tried to express that, I was treated with skepticism and blame. And virtually everyone I know who is neurodiverse has one or more likely many stories similar to this, where people aren't willing to credit us as having a different experience. And people believe their communication is so clear and straightforward. There was the question of, do people get their information from a textbook for training? But when there are 1,000 rules at work, and some of them are spoken and some of them are unspoken, and then there are the rules which are in the manual, but which are ignored. And the manager says to do it one way, and then 3 minutes later in casual conversation, there's a contradictory message. We may not come away with the message you're hoping will come away with about what's important. And people need to check in with us. And it's not that you always have to be watching out and protecting us against that mistake. It's that when we say, I didn't understand that, or whoa, I thought that meant something different, believe us, please. And we will feel very supported at the workplace.
Thank you, Laura. I really appreciate you being transparent and giving us that perspective on what neurodiversity looks like. My next question for you all is, how do the various aspects of the recruitment process, from job descriptions, interviewing, negotiating salaries, to work schedules and accommodations, how do these things pose concerns or even deter neurodiverse candidates from pursuing a position within the company? Dr. Pena?
That's a complex question, May. When I think about it, I think that there are some initial barriers for our neurodiverse population in terms of even getting in the door. First of all, there is the recruitment process. Do we do it, do we do it in person at job fairs? Is there overstimulation when someone walks in the room? That's a huge room and you're going to interview with different companies at each table. If it isn't, if you are applying online, is the application accessible? So there are just a lot of barriers along the way. One of the things I've noticed, though, is that once someone does get in the door, we don't exactly know what challenges that individual may have. I handle the ADA accommodations for employees at the colleges that are assigned to me. And I actually don't know if someone is on the spectrum until usually there's a problem with performance or an interpersonal issue. So one of the things that I think that would create barriers is we don't give people information when they come into the organization of where they can get assistance, where they can get accommodation. I don't know that there is assistance for completing applications unless the individual is working, the applicant is working with a community group outside that's helping them in the application process. So there are just a lot of barriers all along the way. And I think if we have community groups that can support our neurodiverse population in providing them some training, some experience, some experiential mock interviews, it would go a long way to increasing their capability to land a good job. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Joe. Laura, what about you? What are your thoughts on this question?
There's a saying, once you know one person on the spectrum, you know one person on the spectrum. And the ways that, and I'm speaking specifically about being on the spectrum, but any of these neurodiverse issues all have the same core issue. You can't just generalize and assume that you know what people need. After I had my diagnosis, one of the first things that happened, I was at a job fair and someone said, they looked at my resume, which had 15 to 20 years of one-on-one and classroom experience, direct student support, teaching the trainers. I had a lot of experience in all of those areas. And they said, I'm looking at your background and I have something that is absolutely perfect for you. And the job, which I didn't realize at first, was that it was going to be a back office job of facilities maintenance compliance checklists. And the worst of it was I was surrounded constantly by people who were doing that direct client support and the people who were providing support for the people who were working with the clients. And so I was in this mindset to be problem solving the issues that everyone was facing in members of the community that were being served by this organization. And yet the organization said, you're going to be perfect for this job that is back office about facilities. I think they saw, okay, you're on the spectrum, so I know where you belong. That's not where I belong. There was nothing in my experience that said that is the candidate I am. So we need to do more asking people, not just how do you fit in this little container that's this job description that we have, can you do these tasks? But if we can get to the point where we're asking, what are the things you really enjoy doing at work? What are the accomplishments that you've been most proud of in your last job or your last few jobs? I think some of those types of questions will help people not just get in the door and get a position, but get a right fit. And when we have that right fit, many of us are looking to find a place and stay there for 20 years, frankly, maybe grow with the company, yes, but when we get something that's working for us, we like some consistency in our lives. And we can make exceptional contributions and we can be exceptionally loyal. We're not going to job hop to the next thing down the road if you can help us find the way to fit with your company's offerings. But that means looking at us as individuals and talking with us and not just assuming what we're going to be good at or what we're going to struggle with.
Thank you, Laura. I appreciate that. Dr. Adhd, would you please share some of your thoughts on this question?
Yes, I think that when you are looking at recruitment processes, you really need to consider offering a variety of ways that people can apply for a position. I think one of the things that we do is we set one way. You must come in and fill out this piece of paper, and then we shift it to one way. You must go on the computer and fill out this form. And we don't allow for the difference in ways that people can define themselves and express themselves. There are some jobs that the portfolio is the only way. There are some jobs where a portfolio might be helpful. I personally have a resume, but I also have a visual document because for me, the visual made more sense. It showed the path I took from when I started my career and how it wound together to get to where I am now. So I include that when I send in a CV or a resume, but it's not because they asked for it. It's because I choose to include that. There just needs to be an acceptance of multiple ways to apply for positions within a company so that the company can get a better picture of what the individual is capable of.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Adhd. And Dr. Adhd, since you were just sharing that, my last question I have around this topic of recruitment is how can companies or organizations develop successful neurodiversity hiring initiatives that help to increase the employment rates of people with disabilities?
You know, it's an interesting question. There needs to be transparency within the company that, yes, we are hiring people with disabilities. First of all, as soon as you say accommodations are available when you need them, make your request, people with disabilities say, oh, this looks like a company I might be able to work with. So just putting that out there makes a difference. I'm not sure how you reach the specific communities we're talking about. I know personally, I saw something in the chat asking about people who had not been formally diagnosed. I discovered by asking a colleague to test me that it was not my imagination. I have dyscalculia, but I do not have a formal diagnosis, because when your colleague tests you, they're your friend, and that does not make it usable. But because I had already established my career avoiding math and figuring out what math needed to be done on a calculator and when I needed to say a number out loud to make sure that what I wrote down was what I was seeing, then that became okay for me without having to request accommodations. So for some people, the process is going to be one of just knowing that a company is acceptable and that their supervisor that hires them is willing to discuss with them what works and what doesn't work.
That's great, thank you. And Dr. Joe, what about you? What are your thoughts on this question?
So I'm thinking about what a company can do that can increase the success rate of neurodiverse applicants. And I'm thinking that we would have an accessibility statement that would encourage our applicants as they look on a company's website that the company is open to hiring people who are differently abled and bring different talents and gifts to the organization. Once that accessibility is there and an employee comes into the workplace, I think if a company has a DEI director or an ADA director or both, if the company is large enough, those are really key elements, because those are the folks, a DEI director is the one who champions the needs of diverse applicants, diverse students, people in our training programs. So those are the things a company can do. We can also improve our recruiting process. I'm thinking about things that we could do in my organization, which includes better management training that includes information about neurodiverse employees, and include that also in our performance management training. Recently, I was asked to preview a performance management training that's being done, and I put a little comment about neurodiverse individuals, but I'm not sure if the person who will be doing that training will actually bring that forth, but it's a place where our company can increase and be more inclusive. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Joe. And Laura, what are your thoughts around how can companies and organizations develop successful neurodiversity hiring initiatives that help to increase the employment rates of people with disabilities?
I think those things about putting right on the website and stating with your application process that we are open to hiring a diverse community. We are looking to support people with disabilities. You need to cultivate an entire culture of being ready to listen and problem solve, especially in the case of hidden disabilities or things that aren't diagnosed yet. There's a lot of something didn't go right. Let's see if we can figure it out together. One accommodation that is not talked about that often, but which I think could be addressed better with some hiring initiatives, would be the option for shorter hours or taking the same length of the workday, but with more breaks in it, or taking an extended workday, but having if you have 6 hours of expected work in your 8-hour workday, and that plans that you're going to show up, and ways of being flexible around that. For many people with attention and executive function issues, or people with sensory processing, challenges, just the process of holding their focus in a work environment is very stressful and exhausting. And they need frequent times to reset. It's not something that is asking for an unfair advantage that other people don't need those, other people would like those breaks too. It's more about, if you want me to be there 40 hours, you may actually get less out of me than if you let me be there 38 or 32 or whatever. And many of us would be willing, I can't speak for everyone, but many of us would be willing to take lesser pay for the option, especially if we can still have benefits, in exchange for more flexibility on the hours issue, just as one example. The last thing I would just say is managers especially need to present from the beginning that they are problem solvers, that they are problem-solving allies working with their employees, and that they are looking for opportunities to help their employees succeed, so that asking for accommodations doesn't feel like putting a burden out there, but feels like something where we say to the manager, hey, I have this idea about a way that I can do a better job for you. And they're like, oh, cool, let me listen. And it goes from there.
Thank you, Laura. I appreciate that. Thank you all for your responses to that question. So now we'll move into the notion of belonging. According to LinkedIn, getting hired isn't the only problem, but after being hired, neurodivergent people tend to demand a lot of themselves just to try to fit into a world that is not designed for their brain type. So they can tend to try to compensate for their differences, and they have worries that they may not be considered for promotions, and that they may not be considered as productive as their colleagues in the traditional sense. So neurodivergent burnouts are common. And then when you add in the fear of stigma from coworkers, this all leads to the employee feeling like they have to change their personality to try to fit in. So this makes it so important for the workplace to make sure that there are accommodations and education and trainings provided to help neurodivergent employees feel at home and that they belong. Laura, what would you say are some impactful actions a company can take to provide easy access to common accommodation needs in an effort to increase flexibility and reduce barriers in the workplace?
I think I probably approached this a little bit with the last question as well. Talk it up, make it known that you're looking to include people. When you're putting out a job description, many people take that as an absolute list of here's exactly what it is going to be, and not as a, this is something that we can work from and adapt. If someone is willing to work with us and say that there are some elements of the job that are particularly challenging, can those elements be done by someone else? So that you can focus more and put your full-time energy into the areas that you are successful in. I'd like to see more use of allies and advocates in the workplace as well. We're following all the rules in the guidebook as best we can, but we don't necessarily know how to interpret a situation that comes up. We don't know which rule applies. And being told, hey, Cindy is really the expert on anything about the computer programs. But if you're having an issue about trying to get something through the administration, then David is your go-to person. Having someone in the department who is able to say to you, okay, by the way, there was something that just was a little bit off at that meeting, or I think you missed the idea of something. that can do this in a friendly way, not I'm calling you out way. Those things are very, very helpful to us. Remember that we're often coming in with some gaps in our knowledge that you may not even see or recognize as gaps. And those are things that mean we need to be given the benefit of the doubt, not have our mistakes and errors brushed off and ignored. But when we say, help me understand what happened here, that's not how I perceived it. Believe us and work with us.
Thank you, Laura. Dr. Joe, the question was, what would you say are some impactful actions a company can take to provide easy access to common accommodation needs in an effort to increase flexibility and reduce barriers in the workplace? What would you like to add to what Laura has shared?
I think Laura had a good response in terms of making the accommodations easily accessible and available to someone. I would mention that I've had a couple of employees approach me about getting a job coach, and we were able to provide that using professional growth funds. I'd like to see it that we were able to provide it, period. We do have some job coaches within the organization, but we don't have job coaches that are trained to work with employees who are neurodivergent, and that's what we need. And we may be able to get it on the outside. We have a pretty good professional development, professional growth fund for each employee. So we were able to get enough coaching sessions for these employees to last 10 months. So it took them almost through the entire year. And I think in terms of belonging, the employee was able to take a scenario or an interaction, interpersonal interaction, to the coach and work with them on how they could respond to it. Or if they already responded to it and it didn't work, then they could go back and debrief and look to see how they could have a better response the next time around, or what they could say to go clean that up. So I think the job coach is a really great idea. We've been using that with a few employees. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Joe. And Dr. Adhd, is there anything else that you'd like to add to that? What are some actions that companies can take to provide easy access to common accommodation needs?
I'd like to support both of what Dr. Joe and Laura have said, but also just flexibility in policies could make some of those accommodations just part of what is available to all the employees. If you have an office that works 8 to 5, what would happen if you had someone who wanted to come in at 7 and someone who wanted to leave at 6? And instead of having to all be there 8 to 5, they had overlapping schedules, which then allowed the temporary or part-time employees also to fit into a broader day. You know, there are ways to change policies so that the flexibility works for everyone.
Thank you. The next question I have around this is, what kind of training can be done to help leaders and coworkers understand the struggle that many neurodiverse employees face with nonverbal communication, like body language and unspoken cues and inferences? Laura, what is your, what would you say?
There are a number of things. First of all, I'd warn all managers and supervisors to look for those what just happened moments, where it feels like you and the person have a different experience of what happened, or where they've been clearly putting in good effort and then all of a sudden they're doing something that you can't make sense of. Why on earth would they do something like that? Those are situations where people tend to assume that we're acting with bad intent and not give us the clarification, not help us understand the situation, and it escalates. There's a process, if you think back to that office inventory story that I told at the beginning. For many people who are neurotypical, when they're feeling defensive or frustrated or angry, their language may become more extreme. And that's how my manager was saying, we need to know exactly, precisely, specifically how much we have of these things. For someone who's neurodiverse, the response to that, without understanding exactly how that behavior or communication pattern has changed, may be to get more literal instead of being more expansive. So I did exactly precisely, I went for an exact, precise, specific count. And again, just the more I tried to be compliant, the more I tried to demonstrate my goodwill, the less it was believed. It was perceived to be hostile and passive aggressive. So I do ask that managers try to look for those moments of disconnection. Our body language can be different from yours. Our facial expressions can be different. The fact that we're not looking at you, some of us have real issues with eye contact. And by the way, I have eye contact issues in certain situations at certain times, but not always. So you can't just assume that it's a standard. I may actually tell people sometimes, I'm actually going to close my eyes so that I can pay more attention to what you're saying. Otherwise, I may be fully participant in the conversation and we go back and forth and it seems entirely like we're on the same page about something. But I'll walk away from that conversation without having internalized it. And if I do it with my eyes closed and just focus in on the words and the language and the tone of voice, I can come away with more. So encouraging managers to be aware of different communication styles, I think, is important. Managers should also be aware of when they say, I'm a very direct communicator. We all have times when we're less direct, and especially when we're giving those messages that are uncomfortable to give, when we're talking about someone whose behavior was just a little bit off, or who, hey, you know, the goal for this was to produce 5,000 of this product, and you were going for such a high quality product that you only made 100 instead. Great quality, but poor quantity. And they're trying to raise an issue of something that isn't being done well in the workplace. Those are oftentimes when managers become more elliptical in their speaking style. And they feel like they've given a very clear message, but we're coming away with that clear, we are much less likely to come away with that clear message. One of my favorite questions, Brent Scholar asked me it this morning as we were prepping for the webinar. He said, what can I do to support you? When people say, this is what I need to do for my neurodiverse employees, they're making a whole lot of assumptions there. And sometimes the supports that they offer can actually add additional complications for us. So coming to us and saying, what's working well, what's challenging, how can I help you and give you the tools to be successful here, is very, very powerful.
Laura, thank you so much for sharing your experiences and just giving us an even broader perspective on this topic. Appreciate your response. Dr. Adhd, I'll ask you the same question. What kind of training can be done to help leaders and coworkers understand the struggle that many neurodiverse employees face with nonverbal communication, like body language, unspoken cues, and inferences?
You know, when I was at the community college, I worked with a group of students to put together a skit. And in the skit, we had 2 students who understood college altogether, and 1 student whose K through 12 experience had been a real struggle just to get through K through 12 and had no clue about college. And they were discussing application processes and what to do next. And it was a demonstration that the things that you pick up tacitly are very different if your focus has to be on specific communication issues. So I think just giving that experience to employers and supervisors and coworkers so that they can see that not everyone has picked up the same things. It's really, it applies in so many different ways. You know, I also did an icebreaker with groups where we had people stand in certain areas if they had gone to one school district from K through 12, if they had gone to more than 5 schools in that time period, if they had gone to an international school in that period. And it made a significant impact on the people in the room when they realized that we're all at a college and we don't all have the same background coming into this. So people need to just recognize that what we bring to a situation is not exactly like what the person next to us is bringing. And because of that, what we take from what you're saying may not be the same.
Thank you, Dr. Darrow. And Dr. Joe, how about you? What kind of trainings do you think can be done to help leaders?
I think the trainings that we do to help leaders are most effective if we include experiential training and some scenarios. One of the things that we do in our diversity training, which we call Mosaic, is actually do scenarios. And this gives the participants, many of whom are managers or supervisors, the opportunity to experience what an employee experiences. And I think if we do more than that, more of that type of training, not only in our diversity training, but also in our performance management training, our supervisor training, and just put it all across an organization. Every time we have an opportunity to be before a group, it would really increase everyone's sense of belonging, but particularly folks who are neurodiverse, and it would increase our inclusion. And I think those are the things that we, at least those of us in the panel and those of us that are on this seminar, really want to do. We want to be more inclusive, and we want to, by being inclusive, increase the feeling of belonging in whatever organization we're in. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Joe, and thank you all for answering those questions. Now we're going to move into discussing retention and growth, and how we can authentically grow this workforce to both help retain neurodiverse employees and also promote across departments or within different leadership tracks. Dr. Joe, as I mentioned earlier, statistics show that about 80% of adults that are neurodivergent are either unemployed or underemployed. Can you please give us your perspective as to why you think this is happening in the workforce?
Certainly. Thank you for asking that. I think sometimes the challenges come very early, not only with the application process, but in the interview process. The neurodivergent successful people that I thought about, when I was preparing for the seminar, the ones that have worked for small organizations or small companies, or those that have been employed in some creative endeavors, whether they're startup companies, perhaps startup cybersecurity companies, things that have an opportunity for individuals who are neurodiverse to shine, to share their talents and their strengths. And I actually thought of someone that I met right when I first went to California, and he had worked for several companies, owned some patents, and probably paid in taxes what I made in a salary in the entire year. And certainly with his neurodiversity, he was able to contribute to several startup companies, buy into those companies, when they offered IPOs. And so he actually came away and retired at a very early age and was wealthy. And I think we can see several of those. One of my grandson's friends who is on the spectrum, I called him the other day to find out what, how his friend was doing. And this individual had received a full scholarship to college, is now working and going to school at the University of Southern California. So there's a lot of really cool things that happen when we provide that support to people. I do think that providing the scenarios and experiential training to our leaders is really key to making sure that we have an organization that's inclusive and that increases belonging for all individuals that are in the workplace. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Joe. And Dr. Adhd, I'll ask you the same question. Why do you think that these things are happening in the workplace, and why neurodivergent adults are underemployed?
I think under and unemployed individuals have probably either run into problems getting through the interview process, or maybe they've gotten a position that was up, you fit here, instead of, oh, your skills are there, as Laura described before. One of the people I've worked with is a brilliant thinker, and she should be involved in sustainability at a high level, working at nationally. She's participated on some grant programs, but when she gets an employment position, it's difficult to fit what she thinks into that. You must do this in this time frame. So instead of getting pushed upward into those solid idea generation positions that she would be brilliant at, she's kept at a clerical level where she is absolutely unable to function, and then she has to battle that all of the time. I think that communication is something that we really have to improve, so that people are, like Laura said, asking what is working for you, what is not working for you, how can we make this work?
Thank you, Dr. Adhd. Laura, what about you? In talking about the statistics, 80% of adults that are neurodivergent are either underemployed or unemployed. What is your perspective as to why you think this is happening in the workforce?
I think there are a couple of different things that happen. One of them is that, frankly, many of us on the spectrum are very self-aware about where we are successful and where we are not. But many of us do not necessarily have that awareness, especially early in our careers. I took a master's in elementary education, and the first class I taught was the only class I taught using that degree. I went into a 3rd, 4th grade combination gifted program. The multitasking, the managing different groups of students doing different things at once, handling 5 different subject areas of curriculum, as opposed to, I was offered middle school math, which I really enjoy, and I could have done one thing focused all day. How beautiful would that have been? So the fact that I like kids and have fun working with them didn't necessarily mean that going into that amazing classroom was an opportunity where I could be successful. So some of us need help recognizing what are the tasks you enjoy? What is it you look forward to? What interactions with people are going to drain you? But what are the interactions that you feel like you could sustain them for a good part of your workday or your work week? So one part of it is not always recognizing what's a good fit. And sometimes the assumptions about, oh, you're an employee with Asperger's, so you want that back office, you want that tech job. A lot of us are not tech people. A lot of us are language people. I'm a language person. Okay, I do like math, but I'm also very much a language person and a problem-solving person. And that organization had no business telling me that it would be perfect for me to go into back office checklists of facilities maintenance. So we need to move beyond those assumptions. I'll also mention just, the job search process is by nature a transition. And many of us, especially on the spectrum or with attention issues and executive function issues, managing transitions is a difficult process to begin with. And setting the priority and setting our own schedule. I do encourage people, if you have family or friends who are going through this, to work with them to provide some external supports. They may do better if they're doing their job search, working out of a library 4 hours in the morning, and then checking in with one member or a different member of the family twice a week. You know, those are things that individuals can offer that will help us through those difficult transition times. And of course, I will tell you as well that a lot of us are carrying what I would frankly have to describe almost as PTSD. That experience of the supply cabinet, I spent 17 years not understanding. Why was this person so hateful to me? Why, the more I tried to show her that I was doing the best I could and that I was willing and eager, if she had told me to scrub toilets, I would have done it. So why did she see me as hostile? And the feeling of suffering an injustice is so incredibly demoralizing. And many of us deal with that repeatedly after situations. That's not necessarily something that companies can address in their hiring process to make it easier for us, but that is some of the background that look at what we have to overcome to make it as far as the application and the interview.
Again, Laura, thank you for sharing your perspective and your experience. Can I also ask you, what can neurodivergent employees do to advocate for themselves and express an interest in cross-training and growing within a company?
It's a great question. One thing that I've found is very important is just setting out the expectation that as a neurodivergent employee, there may be miscommunications between us. And I say this as I'm interviewing. I say this to my manager on the first day. Hey, there are going to be some situations where you're kind of looking at me and saying, why on earth? And you know what? I want to hear about them. I want to understand them. So come to me and talk to me. Letting employers know that I'm welcoming and receptive of that feedback. That really helps make things so much better. So I'm asking for the benefit of the doubt, and that's something that I do encourage the neurodiverse community that I work with to do as well. I also encourage those individuals to identify more specifics about what they're successful with and what they're challenged by. So instead of allowing people to, instead of, I say, I have ASD, and people go and make their assumptions what that means and what job I want. It's much more helpful if I can say, I can be very literal sometimes. So there may be situations where that gets in the way. Or there are situations where when a small group situation, I may have difficulty finding a way to get a word in edgewise because I don't recognize when it's my turn or when someone has actually stopped talking, or formulating the words, especially for a new idea, is a slower process than for all those people who are just talking a mile a minute. And so being able to identify specifically the areas where we need help and support or have those differences so that we can communicate them well. That's something that I think is very helpful that we can do as well. I had one more thing I wanted to address. Oh, that's actually a little bit of a different topic. I'm going to pass on that. I'd like to say we should also be looking for those allies at work. Look for the people who will explain to us what just happened here, who will be the exemplars of, hey, I'm doing this task and I'm doing it according to everything I'm supposed to do it by, but it's still not going right. Who does this task really well? Let me just sit with them while they're doing it. You know, maybe there is a simpler way through this, that if I just see how other people approach the task, I can find the approach that is going to let me be successful within. Those are some of the things for self-advocacy that I would recommend.
Thank you, Laura. You just gave some really great information and tips, and appreciate you sharing all of those. Dr. Joe, what about you? What can neurodivergent employees do to advocate for themselves and express an interest in cross-training and growing within a company?
So thank you. That's a great question. I believe that to self-advocate for oneself and to look at opportunities for cross-training may require a little bit of support, and that might come in the form of a job coach, as I mentioned before. It might be from a community group that supports neurodivergent employees, but it also could be if you identify someone within the organization that you can go talk to and say, you know, I'm doing really well in this position. I wonder if I could look at this one. Sometimes employees come to me and they're in a position where they're mismatched. And part of what I look at is what their strengths are and where they may be a better match in a different position. Now, my role is not to do career counseling. That's not what I was hired to do, but because I have a counseling background, sometimes I ask those counseling questions and get a little bit more information than other people do. So at least I can guide them and tell them where they can go to look for additional information. At Maricopa Community Colleges, we have career centers at all of our colleges. So our employees can go there. They can sometimes take assessments that will give us some indication of what their strengths are. And so that we can guide them to careers and jobs that work to their strengths and not to their weakness. And I have referred people there. So there's a number of things that we can do, but I think the first thing is finding a safe place or a safe person that you can talk to about this. I know that Jackie Starks and I, oftentimes we get people that are referred to us because we've helped someone else, and then they feel helped and they'll say, you know, you can go talk to Dr. Joe, you can go talk to Jackie, and then we look to see how we can support that employee. So finding that right person to lend that support and walk side by side with you in a direction that supports you being highly successful is really critical. And hopefully in all of our organizations, there is that person that can start that journey with you if you're someone in the audience that's looking for a place to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Joe. Excellent tips. And Laura, I see you have your hand up.
I have. Dr. Joe, you mentioned Jackie Starks, who's a member of DLA, and I just want to say, even from more than 10 years ago when I was at the Maricopa Community Colleges, Jackie was one of the people who made such a difference to me and was so supportive. And just in front of everyone here, I want to just give a shout out and say thank you. Thank you, Jackie.
That's awesome. And Dr. Adhd, I'll ask the question to you as well. What can neurodivergent employees do to advocate for themselves and express an interest in cross-training and growing within a company?
I think that it's important to know that most employees who have some sense of how to move forward do talk with their supervisors. And it may be that we need to just work with neurodivergent employees to know what kinds of questions to check on with your supervisor to find out, you know, is there a potential for promotion from this position? What do I need to do to enhance my skills so that I can move forward? I think just learning what those questions are and then having those conversations with direct supervisor and maybe the supervisor of your direct supervisor would allow that individual to develop the skills to move forward in much the same way that other employees move forward. It's learning what questions to ask and when to ask them. Another thing I wanted to mention was when those questionable things occur in meetings, Personally, I jot them down and then check in with my supervisor or with a colleague later and say, this really didn't quite click. Could you help me understand? Did I come across wrong, and how did I come across wrong? Because I've also had difficulty with the way I communicate. I kind of walk around with what I think is a thoughtful look, and people think I'm mad. So
thank you all for just your candidness and for sharing and providing information, excellent tips that we can all take back with us. Thank you, and I will hand it over to Brent.
All right, thank you very much, May. Great, everybody, thank you so much for all of your information that you've been sharing. We've had lots of questions coming up, and I'm going to tee off something that's kind of been coming up in our conversation here, and it's really focusing on adults. And I think you've touched upon some of this throughout. But I think we're really having a really focused response to this. You know, what are the resources for adults, right, who have never been assessed, right, with a neurodiverse diagnosis, and then, you know, people that think that they're on ADHD or ADD, you know, how can those adults show they can do a job, you know, with life and job experience without trying to get a degree at 50 years old, like, you know, starting completely over. So it's all about resources and such. And I'm going to ask if you have some specific resources that we could share, that you send them to me so that I can include them on our website and on our YouTube channel when we show the replay. So I'm going to start with Dr. Joe.
Okay. Now, are you asking about resources? Is that your question, Brent?
Yes.
I just want to make
The
sure.
short answer is, what are the resources?
All right, good. So we have community groups that will work with individuals in the community who are seeking to gain employment. Prior to coming to Maricopa, I did some volunteer work with organizations, particularly that organizations where individuals were wanting to re-enter into the workplace. So I'm thinking that those would be great resources. Fresh Start, for example, offers some resources for women wanting to go back in the workplace. And I do think they do some workshops and seminars for men also. There's also Dress for Success that has some things that they assist people in the interview process. And for a while, I was doing workshops and just some freebie training with individuals on interview techniques, applications. We actually got a bunch of computers donated, and we had individuals, participants, go into the computers, using the computers, and apply for jobs, and all of them got jobs. So I think that if we can work with those organizations outside, and maybe some of us that are on the panel can volunteer. I'm thinking, gee, I should be volunteering some time now. It's been a little more difficult with COVID doing things remotely, but I think that we can offer that support into the community.
Great, thank you. Dr. Adhd. What resources do you, besides the one that you represent at ASU, sales?
Well, you know, when students do come to us, one of the things we do is we try to connect them with some of the community groups, and some of the groups are government funded, like vocational rehabilitation, which came up in the notes earlier. We try to connect people with whatever groups are able to provide them the assistance they need to become tested if they haven't been tested, and then to use that documentation to get the kinds of accommodations they need. At the same time, I've identified some online sources. Usually I do a Google search to find them, but there are some groups that offer lists of ADHD coaches and that type of thing, so that an individual can find some sources in the community without necessarily having to attend college to get access. It gets to be complicated. You know, those resources are out there, but they're not easy to find. So always ask someone.
Right, and thank you so much. And as we know, resources are a little maybe easier to hopefully find because we can, like you say, Google, right? We can use that Google search and to ask I'm gonna add that in. Like, if you don't ask for support, then people may not know that you need it. So Laura, I'm gonna just pass it over to you because I know you do a lot of alliance work with employers and stuff and consulting. What resources are you providing them that we could use? And then we'll go back to Dr. Joe because I see your hand up.
I do a lot of the individual support for people on the spectrum, either as they're going through their job search process or as they're trying to make a job fit better for them. I do a lot of work with people who are not, that's the individual coaching I do, but I also do work with organizations where I come in as the job coach, or where I come in and I say, when you have someone that, when you have an employee where something isn't working right, that's one of the situations where I make myself especially available so that I can help resolve those issues, that I can help identify and understand. You know, I say sometimes I'm a translator between the neurodiverse and neurotypical perspectives. In the Maricopa Community Colleges, I taught in the workforce readiness program. I taught job readiness. I taught workplace communication. By the way, I still struggled with some of those issues. It was only when I understood that I was being perceived in a different way from what I intended, but I didn't know that until I had my own diagnosis. So I help people to understand that difference in perspective and sometimes recognize the gaps and assumptions that are part of that picture. I do really like AZ Assist is a wonderful organization that's very small community self-help networking among people on the spectrum and their families. That's a great organization. There's also SARC, of course, the Southwest Autism Resource and Research Center, or I may be mixing up the two R's. They do some really good programs sometimes, and they do have, if you're looking to do an initiative, reaching out and offering things into the autism community, those are great places and organizations to reach out and say, hey, here's an opportunity, who's interested? They will help you get some of that message out.
Great, thank you so much. And we're going to go back to Dr. Joe before we move on to our next question. And we have a special guest that I've brought live, able to speak. So Dr. Joe, what would you like to add?
I want to add one thing I forgot to mention, and that is that some of our employees have discovered that they are able to get tested using their insurance. It does require a prescription from the primary care physician, but with that, with that recommendation from the primary care, they're able to go get tested and bring those results back to us at the college. So I think that might be an opportunity for people if they are struggling and they want to know a little bit more about themselves to use that. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. And I just want to take a quick moment before we jump to our next question and say, May, thank you so much for moderating today. You've done such a wonderful, wonderful job. Thank you, thank you. I'm going to give a little more space to our presenters. So I didn't want her just to disappear from the screen without saying thank you to her. And I now want to ask, and I'm going to say Sherry because that's what I think it might be, but she's been very active in our chat providing her story. And I want to give you the opportunity to, one, correct me if I said your name wrong, please, as well as ask your question and maybe just share a little bit about your experience as well. You're unmuted, Sherry. Are you there? Okay, as we try to get that, I'm going to ask a really quick question for any one of our panelists. Stephanie was asking, does a person need to have a formal diagnosis to ask for an accommodation?
Here, I will jump in. Typically, you have to have a diagnosis to ask for an accommodation through our office, which is specifically for students registered with a diagnosis. On the other hand, if you're talking to your supervisor and you're just having a difficulty with one process, you can always ask about changing a process. That's why I was looking for more flexibility with employers. I think a lot of times we don't get it because we don't think to just ask the question, is this possible?
Got you. Great. Anyone else want to add anything to that? No. Okay, we can check. Sherry, are you there?
I think so.
All right. Hi, welcome, welcome. Thank you for your participation today. We really appreciate you. Just share maybe a little bit about your background and then the question that you had asked in the chat, please, for our panelists.
Yeah, absolutely. So my initial question was, are there any kind of community groups where job age and or college age students can get some kind of job coaching and guidance other than through parents? Personally, I've got a 40-year-old who was ultimately diagnosed on the spectrum, although back in the mid-'80s, there was no such thing as the spectrum in Western New England. So it was just, she acts weird. And so it was more of a, just learn how she ticks. I mean, they were supportive. They just didn't provide us as parents much of a resource. There was no counseling. There was no parental guidance. Just, hey, she's different and you need to figure out how she reacts. Fast forward 20 years, she gave us a beautiful grandson who we have now adopted. And with her being on the spectrum and Biodad being on the spectrum, at 20 months, he was diagnosed on the spectrum. And next month actually starts at Glendale Community with a presidential scholarship, full tuition waiver. He's done very well, but we were told at 22 months to teach him to sign because he would be forever nonverbal. And absolutely not the case, because as parents and having no clue how to treat him, we just kept pushing the envelope. Every time he tried to crawl into what we referred to at the time as Shawnee Land, we would get his attention and pull him back out. And I hope we didn't do any additional damage, but he seemed to come through with it, and he learned to adapt in his world around him. There's no doubt in my mind that I myself have ADHD, possibly a little bit on the spectrum. But when I mentioned it more recently to my primary provider, what I got from her was, no, people at your age aren't readily diagnosed with it. It has to be something else. And I kept saying, you're not hearing me. I'm telling you, this has gone on since school. But in the 60s, there wasn't anything like this. It was never diagnosed. I'm not saying it's new. I'm telling you that it just has never been diagnosed. And I just kept getting the poo-poo, no, we have to test for other things. So essentially she figures I'm losing my crackers. And that's not the case. That's not the road I'm looking to go down. So I just kind of walked away from that one. However, real quick, I'm wrapping it up, I promise. I have a bachelor's degree in counseling and human services, and a master's degree in religious studies. And this has been a topic that is just fascinating to me. And so my second question is, are there places that people who may be partly qualified can get additional training and volunteer as job coaches or advocates for people on the spectrum? Go.
That's open to all of our panelists.
I absolutely love that last question, and I do not specifically know of an organization that provides training for job coaches and advocates. but when anyone founds that organization, please let me know.
I do know there's an organization that provides job coaching for individuals in the workplace who have ADHD or ADD. And it is in a folder that is pertinent to a particular employee. So I'll have to go in there and get that information. But that is here in Phoenix. So I'm assuming that it would be available in other cities too. So Sherry, I don't know whether you're in the Phoenix area or whether you're remote somewhere else, but I can get that information. At least you'd be able to call and ask them, how do do they do the training? Can they recommend someplace where you can get the training, and perhaps you can be part of that cadre that provides the coaching.
Thank you. I'm in the Valley here.
Okay, good.
And Dr. Joe, if you send that over to me, I'll make sure
Perfect.
that it gets put on the video on YouTube and then also
Okay.
on our website as a resource. And I'm
Okay.
writing down all these great resources, by the way,
Good.
that I want to say our panelists are great, but our attendees, you're even better, right? I'm sorry. When it comes, they are putting in so many wonderful resources. And I have another really great question, and then we're going to go live with Jackie Starks. How do you decide whether or not you should disclose in your work that you have ADHD or ASD? Is transparency the best? Is it appreciated in terms of communication? The person doesn't have any specific accommodations they're looking for, but when is it the right time to disclose? And I'm going to add in my piece of this is because if you disclose, you're now making yourself vulnerable perhaps, and maybe you're fearful that you're going to lose your job because maybe it's not officially diagnosed or something, or maybe it is, and even if it is. So and I think the panelists here are all I think I know what they're all going to say, because it's the same thing I say to my students. If you don't tell me, I can't help and support you. But what do you think? Is there a right time?
I think the right time is going to vary from person to person and situation to situation. I typically advise people to disclose during an application process if they need an accommodation through the application process or through the interview process. Aside from that, I prefer that they wait until they're actually on the job and then disclose to their supervisor along with whatever accommodation they're requesting. It depends on the setting. I've always worked in settings with disability. Therefore, I kind of just randomly disclose when I'm in a conversation, depending on who I'm talking to and how it fits that conversation. But in a corporate setting, I might not do that. It really is going to depend on the culture of the organization and the responsiveness and supportiveness of the supervisor.
Excellent.
I agree
Joe?
with Dr. Darrow, because sometimes you don't know what the individual is walking into. I do believe that it depends a lot on the challenges that you might experience early on in your job. I don't know that all supervisors would understand if an individual came up and said, I'm neurodivergent, I have, this is how I learn. I do think that we can ask as supervisors and managers, what do you need to support you to succeed? That's a question that's very general. Also, to empower the new job applicant or the new job employee, that employee could say, this is how this is what I need. If you ask me, give me directions. I like to hear them verbally, but I also like to be able to see them in writing. So there's ways that we can ask the person given us tasks or given us directions, how we need to receive that information. I noticed that sometimes with employees, when I've dealt with them and we're resolving some issues, just recently, I wasn't sure because I couldn't see her. I couldn't see whether she was taking notes or not. She wasn't on camera. I was on camera, but she wasn't. I did ask her, could you just summarize for us to make sure that we all know what our responsibilities are? Because I had responsibilities too, but I asked it in a general way, more like I needed to know, but really I wanted to make sure she knew. But those are ways that we can encourage people to ask for what they need and then review with them that they understand the different steps.
And Laura, I'm going to ask you in a little different way the same question. When did you feel, because you've been to, that it was okay for you to disclose?
Well, now since so much of what I do is involved with the neurodiverse community and with neurodiverse advocacy, now for me, that's right point blank from the beginning. I have noticed that employers and organizations tend to be very, if you don't disclose, I can't help. And the people I speak to are on the spectrum have had very otherwise experiences, experiences where they do feel discriminated against, where they do feel it's not safe to mention these challenges, where if it's during an application, people are just going to say, well, let's choose an easier candidate to deal with. One of the things that I tell people I'm working with most specifically is helpful is instead of general, I'm disclosing I have autism, to disclose, you know what, I need some help prioritizing sometimes. And you can make as many of those individual disclosures as you want to your manager, but you're giving them, when you specifically say, I need help in this setting to accomplish this task. When you say I'm neurodiverse, they're going, what do I do with that? I don't know how to support someone who's neurodiverse. But when you say, I get overwhelmed in noisy, crowded spaces and I need additional breaks to recover from that, then you give them something they can work with. And it also is a way to disclose without getting into the stigma. So it's a very safe kind of disclosure. On the other hand, I also know some people who, the ones who are very obviously on the spectrum, sometimes find it's easier to just say right from the beginning, I'm on the spectrum, so sometimes my manners are a little bit weird, and let me know what I need to do differently. And then people are more likely to give them the goodwill to work with them to make those changes. But for me, since even after my diagnosis, I got a whole lot of, oh no, you can't be. You don't present like that. You have good eye contact. You have a lot of vocal inflection. Telling people that I was on the spectrum didn't give them any way to support me. And I encourage people on the spectrum to try to provide information if they don't know exactly what supports they need, be able to describe exactly where their difficulties are.
Thank you so much, everybody, for those. And Laura, I think that's really good advice for everybody, right? If we have a question regarding whether or not we're neurodiverse or not, or I think Dr. Joe, you mentioned we're all differently abled, right? In the very beginning, that's something for us to think about. I'm going to now ask Jackie Starks to join us. And if she would, she's going to turn on her video. So we're going to add her on. Yes, she's been mentioned. She's one of our, for full disclosure, she is part of Diversity Leadership Alliance and part of our Education Committee, but she has some great questions. And I think, and I'd like you just to be able to ask them live. So hello, Jackie, good morning.
Good morning. Many have been answered, I think, but I do want to shift. And I want to say thank you for warning me because I had time to comb my hair. I was supposed to be out of the country today and that didn't happen. He said, I'm going to put you on camera. I'm like, ooh, let me do something. Thank you for the warning. Appreciate it. Like I said, this is a fabulous panel. I appreciate you all. I want to shift the focus a little bit. We're talking about employees and what they can do. I want to shift the focus back to employers. to managers, supervisors, leaders, and equity, because sometimes you have these policies that are anti-equity, right? So what I see quite often, we have many neurodiverse employees in our work environment. They're already there, but they're not getting the support. And then what happens is they start documenting them out to terminate, to demote, right? So, and you were talking about hiring and retention, we have employees there. So beyond having a diagnosis paper saying, this is what I have, let's speak to, if you all can speak to employers, leaders, managers, and supervisors, if they're looking from that mindset of success for our employees and students, how does that look and feel to them beyond saying, well, go get that diagnosed first, and now I can help you. And as Laura said, that's not always the case, because what I typically see is when that happens, is like, let me see how I can help you out of the organization, not how can I help you succeed within the organization. So I would love to have you all speak to that, if you will.
Thank you very much, Jackie. And Laura, you are raising your hand, so.
I am ready to go on that one. It is a very dear and important topic to me. Once someone is ready to document you out, there's not much you can do to restore things, is what I have found. It's very much a matter of confirmation bias. They're expecting things to go wrong, and there's not flexibility. What I would like to see managers do as part of evaluations and reviews, have the conversation about what are the things you've been most excited to work on? What are the things you're proudest of having done in this job? Build the conversation around the strengths sometimes. And then if it looks like there are things that really are not working out and maybe the position wasn't the right position, but there may be opportunities to shift part of that role and say, this one manager hasn't been a good manager, but a manager who is more supportive of this, or this department has you in too much, has you constantly going from one situation to another situation to another situation. We need to give you the opportunity to have a more focused set of things that you're doing with your time so that you can kind of manage and keep yourself on track. I know a lot of people who would be, I know a lot of people. I have had several jobs where if people had offered me opportunities to move sideways in the company or to cut out part of my job description, even to take it down to a lower salary, to do the part of the job that I do well. And I will remind you, we are ready to build a commitment when we get a job that is the right fit for us. I worked with a test prep company with Kaplan for about 18 years, sometimes on a part-time basis, sometimes on a full-time basis. I had a good fit. They gave me opportunities to do what I did well. And I stayed loyal. I was with a bookstore and I stayed with that company 5 years as a full-time employee and then another 7 years part-time, depending on what other things that I was doing. So when you help us find the fit for what we can do and what we can contribute in your organization, it's tremendously powerful. There is definitely too much, let us document them out and make things and end it. And it is incredibly demoralizing. And there are injuries that stay with us for years and a lifetime even. When you help us find, if something isn't working in a position though, do look and see if there are opportunities, especially if the employee shows signs of being committed to the position, being eager to work things out, but somehow it isn't happening. Be ready to do some problem solving actively with them. The last thing I'll point out is on my screen, it says nothing about us without us. That's from the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network. There are a lot of people who will give us an improvement plan, which is designed for us. The manager says, this is the problem and here are the 3 steps that will address it. That may not always match our experience. And the improvement plan that had me doing extra when I was in the multi-age gifted classroom, that was a nightmare. It was a nightmare for me because I had too many things happening at once and I couldn't focus. And instead they wanted to give me extra training and extra coursework that I had to do myself while I was teaching on building a connection and building community with my students. It wasn't what I needed. It was just that I couldn't get to that calm place within myself where I could deliver on something that I already intellectually knew. So nothing about us without us. A performance improvement plan, I think if it's going to be successful, begins with, okay, here's what we're seeing that's not getting accomplished. Do you agree that that's something that needs to be accomplished? Okay, what do you think is getting in the way? Here's what I see is getting in the way. What are some strategies that could approach that? Let's talk about it together. Do you have strategies that would be helpful that you would like us to implement for you? Are you having trouble thinking of strategies? I can suggest a couple of different ways we might go about trying something. And then one thing that I love at the DLA is there's often that question at the end, what is one thing you can do in the next few days? So instead of coming away with a list of 20 different things that I'm supposed to do to make a difference, to make it better, that's going to be extra research and planning, all of this that I have to do, take a moment together and say, okay, I want to move towards that ultimate goal. We've identified the ultimate goal of what needs to improve. And here is something I'm going to focus on doing actively right now that can help. And here's when we'll check in on it. So the 2 things I would like to see especially, 1, performance improvement plans that are done without us, I really do not think are very effective and helpful. 2, if you have the employee who shows the signs of wanting to make things work, but it's not fitting, look at alternatives to getting rid of them. Look for opportunities to help them get a better fit, possibly within that job still by modifications, but may also mean moving to another area in the company or another manager where they can be tremendously valuable and make a great contribution.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Laura. Dr. Joe, Dr. Adhd, would you like to add anything?
So thank you, Laura. I'm thinking the recommendations that Laura had, wouldn't it be great to have those as part of the process before we start the official and formal progressive discipline? You know, to have those questions, and actually, because we do have in our organization, we do have coaching and you know, some interactive conversations, but we don't really delineate them the way that Laura has articulated them here. And I think that's really great. If we could actually provide that and say, this is what it would look like. It's an interactive conversation. Both parties participate. One party doesn't tell the other party what they need if they're giving them a PIP, or if they're giving PIP, meaning performance improvement plan, that it's together that they come up with a way to support the employee being successful in the position they're in, or support them in moving to a position that will enhance and embrace their talents. So that would be great if we had that in policy, because I don't think our policies in most organizations really look at empowering the individual. Thank you for asking that, Jackie.
Dr. Joe, let's follow up on that together, you and I later, and I can look at some things where I might be able to help develop and present.
And maybe I can follow up with you also, because we have just switched here from employee evaluations, which look backward to what you already did and can't be changed, to conversations that look forward to current job priorities and continued learning. So the most common question that I ask of my employees is, what do you need from me? And I think that kind of forward looking builds the entire team.
Thank you so much, everybody, for all the really great questions. And as we move out into the next portion, I want to give you all that one last, as Laura alluded to, 1 minute. 1 minute as we're leaving out. What are the one or maybe two things that our attendees can implement in their organizations to encourage hiring and to support the neurodiverse employees within the company? So Laura, we'll start with you really fast.
Sorry, I was distracted a moment. Give it to me again.
Sure. Here's that closing moment. What's that one thing that our participants can take away, right, in order to implement and encourage hiring and support of neurodiverse employees within their organization?
The one thing I'd like to see is more open conversations. The companies need to start by saying, we're actively looking to have diverse personnel. The companies need to say we're actively eager to find out how to support our employees. And that's something that's part of a company culture, and it's something that needs to start with the training of the managers and the supervisors, and it needs to be explicit through the steps of the hiring process, but it also needs to be just addressed as something that the managers are being constantly bringing up. And I love that idea, by the way, of changing the focus of, instead of past performance, to where do we go? And I would love to hear more about how those programs, how that kind of evaluation works.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Laura, for being here today. Dr. Adhd.
I'd like to see companies learn from this past year when they suddenly went remote, that some people liked remote, some people didn't like remote. So maybe we need to not have such rigid policies, but instead more flexibility in our policies, so that whether the person is neurodiverse or neurotypical, they would still be able to say, could I work at this time and get the same work accomplished, rather than later in the day because I think better in the morning or whatever. You know, just some flexibility in the policies that don't require documentation to get a little wiggle room.
I was muted. And to close us out, Dr. Joe.
I knew you were muted. I was just going to jump in. So one of the recommendations I would have is that an organization look at not only doing the training with the managers and supervisors, but also doing some training with the hiring committees. So we bring people in and expect them to know these things, and they don't. They don't know all of the aspects of inclusion and all of the aspects of diversity. And this is one aspect of that. So I'd like to see that I want to say requirement mandatory training for all hiring committees to have, even if it's only an hour, 90 minutes, something that allows them to look at all aspects and be more inclusive, both in their interview techniques and in presenting more scenarios, more, experiential things, so that our diverse employees have a better chance of success. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. And I'm saving the best for last. Joanna, I know you've been patiently waiting. I've been putting you off. What would you like? I know you have a lot to add to this conversation, and always do. So I'm going to pass it back over to you to finish us up.
I have to just tell you, from this warrior mom to all of you, thank you. This is such an important conversation. I cannot begin to express to you how much it affects not just my life, but a lot of people's lives. And at the end of the day, individuals like my son, AJ, who is on the spectrum, he is one of the most loyal, right? Loyalty is kind of a component of how they're wired differently. Gentle and committed individuals, and at the epicenter of it, wants to please, right? Whether it's his supervisor, his teachers, and imagine if you had those traits in some of your employees, right? Because they're employees you have that, they're not so happy to be there, not sure they want to be there, and kind of have this attitude, right, about work. And so just honoring that and celebrating that is so important. What I also, just watching the panelists and just listening to your advice, it reminded me of something we could all do. So for all of the HR professionals, the managers, the supervisors, the leaders, the CEOs of companies that are on the call today, remembering that how we communicate and then allowing space to receive and hear. The one thing I think that we don't do a good job of, as just people in general, is slowing down conversation, allowing it to breathe, right? And giving people the space. We want, when we ask you a question, right then, I want you to answer. And my son will always say, I'm getting there. I just need to process some things really quickly, right? He has learned to advocate for himself, but there's something about communication that we just don't allow ourselves to receive that person and receive the information. And that's the one thing I wanted to say, as you're looking at these individuals, that are neurodiverse in your organizations, they're all different. I love you saying that, Laura. When you meet one person on the spectrum, you've just now met one person on the spectrum. Same thing if you meet one African-American female, you've just now met one African-American female. The intersections of all of it is really interesting. And I just wanted to point out something that's very important. What Laura said is something that I think is important for us all to recognize, because sometimes we're overwhelmed with the term. So we hear neurodiverse and we go, oh, I've never heard that before, or neurodivergent, we go, oh, I don't know what that means. That's why we sort of asked the question at the beginning. But if you tell me what you need and in that specific way, then I know how I can advocate. My son, we have funny stories, Laura, you talk about my son when he told someone he was on the autism spectrum, the very next thing is their volume went to like 1,000. Oh, AJ, it's so, and he literally leaned back to me and he goes, Mom, I think this person's hard of hearing. And I fell out laughing because it was that, he's like, I think, and then he thought, should I speak louder? Because maybe they're speaking loudly because they can't hear well, and so he was really trying to figure out, how do I pivot in this space? It was really funny. And he had to say, my hearing is perfectly good. Sometimes my brain, it's a little, he uses the word wonky. That's his word, a little wonky, but hearing really good. And the person laughed and caught themselves, right? So it's those small pivots, but allowing people the grace, right, is the other thing, to just receive each other. That's a lesson across diversity. That's a lesson across inclusion. That's a lesson across culture and race and all of it. So I really am so honored for all of your perspectives today. That was wonderful to share that. And like I said, for a mom that has lived this since my AJ was 3, and I've read everything and done all that, now that he's getting ready to enter the workforce, this was cathartic to know that there's information out there and support structures out there that are designed for him to be successful. So again, another thank you to our moderator, May Dobbins, and to Victoria Stinson, Dr. Adero, Dr. Joe, Laura. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We are humbled and we are honored. And thank you to all of you we don't take for one instance your time for granted. We know it's a commodity we don't have enough of. And I want to just take a second to just thank also all of the individuals. You see a few of us here, but there's so many people that are standing shoulder to shoulder with us that really help make all of our workshops and our conference a success. And it wouldn't be possible without the contributions from those volunteers, those sponsors, and most importantly, our board of directors. I just wanted to just give some recognition to the board of directors, including some of our new board members. They are really pivotal in terms of driving the strategic direction of the organization, and really have been pivotal in our growth for the past 20 years. I also want to thank the DLA Education Committee. They are responsible for planning these monthly workshops that you see. And a very special thank you to Education Committee members, May Dobbins, who you're moderating, and Victoria Stinson. They were directly responsible for driving today's neurodiversity workplace topic and all of the content that you saw. So yay, thank you very much, May. Thank you very much, Victoria. And as always, thank you so much. Special thank you to Dr. Brent Scholar. Brent, you are tremendous and really helped kind of make this thing move quickly and smoothly in terms of all the technical aspects. Also want to thank our sponsors. None of this is possible without the financial funding from them. So a special thank you to Tegna Foundation, which is Channel 12, and the amazing DLA 2021 programming grant that we received from them. Special thank you to board member Emily Mowers and Carrie Watts also, and Tram Mai, who has really been an advocate for all of the things we do here and has helped moderate some of our past sessions. Thank you to Mayo Clinic and co-founder, Mr. Marion Kelly. We received the Everybody In Fund for Change grant, which also supports this dialogue series. And last but certainly not least, thank you to the Black Philanthropy Initiatives Grant Fund, my friend and colleague, Ms. Kim Covington, who has been just tremendous in just helping us really navigate this space and get more funding for these important dialogue series. So we are just grateful, we are humbled. And Brent, did you want to just talk very quickly about dates for the conference before we close out?
I certainly can. Let's see. So we talked a little bit about already, we have our awards that are available to you, right? Those are due September 27th. Please, I want to work my committee really hard this year. So please send those nominations in. You can find that all on our homepage at our website. Also, I want to share, we are not done, right? Our conference will be November 17th through the 19th with a special awards ceremony. But before we get there, on September 23rd, we have our special LGBTQIA focus. I think we're still working on it, so bear with us, but we're going to be focusing on transgender and the workplace. Then on October 14th, we will also be having our October one, which is going to be focusing on the sustainable indigenous practices, featuring a very long-time DLA Rowdy Duncan and another panel. I put both of those links up there in the chat for everyone, so you can register now. Please just know that they are still under construction and don't have all of the information, but the timing is there, which is going to always be 9 to 11 a.m. on September 23rd, and then again on October 14th. Now, we do a lot of work, as Joanna says, and it's all volunteer, and we have amazing corporate sponsors. However, if you are really enjoying what you see here today, we would like to ask you maybe in this 20th anniversary year to maybe donate $20 to Diversity Leadership Alliance. We are a 501c3, and you can talk to your tax professionals to see if that will be possibly a write-off on your taxes. And with that, I'm going to bow out and
it's back to me. Thank you so much, Brent. Thank you, thank you. I want to just say to all of you, I guess if we make kindness the goal, maybe that we can get closer to having a truly reimagined inclusive workplace where everyone feels like not only that you've recruited them to be there, but that they actually belong at the table. And if we make kindness the goal, perhaps we can get to a place that shifts the pendulum in terms of these systems that have been perpetuated for many, many years. So that if we could just make that one thing our goal, I think we could just really get to a better place and a better space for all. Again, another special thank you to our amazing moderator, May Dobbins, today's panelists, Dr. Joanne Pina, Laura Kameny, and Dr. Adero Allison. We are humbled by your expertise, we're humbled by your contributions, and most importantly, the vulnerability of your stories. Thank you so much for leading the conversation, today's dialogue. We are grateful for all of you, and we want to thank you for your time today, joining us with our uncomfortable conversations that ignite change. Take care of yourself, take care of each other, and we look forward to seeing you next month. Thank you, everyone. Cheers. Bye-bye.